Welcome to our screencast on the course of World War II. Okay, we're going to start with a quick overview of the parts of this screencast. We start as usual with our essential question, then we'll talk about the four main aspects of the war. First, the European theater, or Europe at war. Second, Japan at war. Third, the Allies' advance. And then fourth, the last days of the war. We'll finish up the screencast with a brief discussion about Europe after World War II and its legacy. Alright, let's begin. Okay, the essential question. How did the Allied forces ultimately prevail in World War II? Okay, what were the events that occurred and what are the developments that happened that led to their eventual victory? Okay, the first part is Europe at war. The main idea is that Germans used the lightning war strategy, or Blitzkrieg, to gain control of much of Western and Central Europe. But Britain was undefeated and German troops were stopped in Russia. Okay, Germany's use of the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, was used to attack Poland and stunned Europe with the speed and efficiency of the attack. In the image to the right, we can see the directions and the flanks that they used when they attacked Poland. In September of 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union divided Poland. They came up with a pact, and each took control of one half of the country. By spring of 1940, Hitler used a Blitzkrieg tactic against Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Okay, so how did the Blitzkrieg work? Well, in their headquarters they had four different types of equipment. They had heavy guns, they had the tanks, armored tracks, and armored cars. What they would do is they would have air support with the Junkers. They would come through, they would bomb the area, and then they would have the main armor attack come up the middle. They would also have the armored cars and reconnaissance vehicles come up the different flanks. So on the left and on the right side, they would have them surround the enemy. Okay, on June 22nd, 1940, the French signed an armistice allowing German armies to occupy 3/5 of France, essentially surrendering most of the country. If we see in the map, the northern part is completely taken over. The western part, which is the coastline, was also a militarized zone by the Germans. The U.S. citizens did not want to get involved in this. Okay, FDR adopted a policy of isolationism, which basically meant stay out of it. They denounced the German attacks, but didn't pledge any troops or want to get involved with the conflict. And a series of neutrality acts were also passed to prevent them from getting involved. In August of 1940, the German Air Force, Luftwaffe, launched a major offensive on Great Britain. I have no idea if I pronounced that right, so maybe one of you guys can look it up and correct me in class. What Hitler didn't understand, though, is that when he switched his attacks from the military installations to the civilian populations, well, he did this to kill the morale. Okay, he didn't just want to kill civilians, he wanted to destroy the morale of the country. But what happened was, while he did that, it allowed the military installations to build back up. So Great Britain's army actually was strengthened once he switched his attack to the civilian areas. Because of that, the British Air Force was able to inflict a huge amount of damage and persuade Hitler to postpone his invasion of Great Britain. However, Hitler thought that Britain would drop out of the war if they didn't have support of the Soviet Union. So his next step was to invade the Soviet Union, and he was hoping a full occupation of the country by winter. However, he didn't understand, the timing. Okay, he thought this was all going to be wrapped up by summer or fall, but ended up going through into the winter months. So the Germans quickly captured a lot of Russian soldiers, went right through the Ukraine, but an early winter turned the tide. The Germans did not have preparations for winter, they didn't have the right supplies, and they were forced to halt their advances. The Soviets launched a counterattack in December of 1941. We can see in that image there that the Russians were much more prepared for this battle. Okay, now we turn to the Japanese front. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor outraged Americans and led to the entry of the United States into the war. Okay, on December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked the U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor, hoping to destroy the Pacific Fleet in any attempt of U.S. involvement. But, as we know, that did the exact opposite. Okay, it didn't keep us out of the war, it actually drove us into war in the Pacific. Japan quickly acquired territory throughout Southeast Asia, creating what they termed the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. Now, after Pearl Harbor, there was overwhelming support for the United States to join forces with European nations and China to engage in war with Japan. 4 days later, Hitler declared war on the United States. So this really plunged the United States into a world war on two fronts, in Europe and in the Pacific. Okay, so the third thing we'll discuss is the Allied advance. The Allied forces stopped the advance of the Germans and the Japanese. How did they do this? Well, the first step was to create an alliance. And the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, who, they did not agree on many things, but on this they did. They agreed to fight the Axis powers, such as Germany, Italy, and Japan, until there was an unconditional surrender. Okay. Hitler was still confident at this point, though. So in 1942, Japan continued to advance in the Pacific. German forces had fought the Soviet Union and had made advances in northern Africa as well. Okay, so what happened is when the Allies announced that they were going to go into war, they mobilized their entire society. Okay, so if we look at the workforce in 1940 in the U.S., under 10% worked in the armed forces or industry for the armed forces on the home front. By 1943, almost 35% of Americans were either in the armed forces, okay, or they were working in an industry to support them. Okay, so again, about 35% or so of the workforce was devoted particularly to the war effort. In May of 1943, the tide of the war turned when British and American coalitions forced German and Italian troops to surrender in French North Africa. Okay, so this was actually fought on the African continent as well. A lot of people don't realize this, but it was the Pacific, Europe, and also Northern Africa. By the spring of 1943, Hitler also realized that his fight with the Soviets was going bad. The Battle of Stalingrad was going to end in a German defeat and an eventual retreat from that region. Now, in the Pacific front, the Japanese forces were defeated by Allied troops in the Battle of Midway Island when the U.S. planes destroyed 4 attacking Japanese aircraft carriers. With the help of General Douglas MacArthur, the U.S. Army, Marine, and Navy forces freed the Japanese-held islands of the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Okay, the last years of war. The Allied victories forced Germany and Japan to surrender unconditionally, and we'll take a look here at how that unfolded. Okay, the Allies turned the tide of the war with the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia on May 13th of 1943. In September, the Allies took Sicily, in an area which Winston Churchill referred to as the soft underbelly of Europe. The Allied forces planned a strategic invasion of France and Great Britain, which we now know of as D-Day. That image is from the award-winning Saving Private Ryan. We saw clips of that in class. In my view, hands down the best depiction of the hell of war, especially on the D-Day front, where about 42 to 45% of the first wave on D-Day was actually killed in that attack. Okay, the Allied forces under U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower landed on the Normandy beaches in what we regard as history's greatest naval invasion on June 6th of 1944. We can see in that image the 5 different beaches. 2 were designated for American forces, which were Omaha and Utah Beach. The British forces had Golden Sword, and the Canadian had Juno Beach. So those were the 5 landing areas that the Allies were going to stage their attack against Germany. Now, once they got ashore, they actually diverted the German troops. They had been bombing other areas of France, which made them think they were going to land there. So they actually were very slow to respond to the D-Day invasion, even though it was very fortified with machine guns and barbed wire and mines. Once they got through those defenses, there wasn't much resistance as there could have been. Okay, Germany should have, from their viewpoint, put more troops in that area, but they didn't. So the Allied troops liberated Paris by the end of August in 1944 and continued their march up towards Germany. Okay, these are some of the battles. Some of the key ones we'll focus in on are the Normandy, which we just discussed, then the Battle of the Bulge moving up towards Germany, what we just discussed earlier in the screencast, the Battle of Stalingrad, and then we can see some of those North African battles in Tunisia with a North African landing up through Italy. Okay, with the imminent defeat of Germany and the partisan murder of Mussolini, Hitler committed suicide on April 30th of 1945. Soviet forces advanced through Eastern Europe until Germany surrendered officially on May 7, 1945. We can see in that picture that that is the official surrender and the signing of the documents. In the Pacific Front, the war was still going on. Japan surrendered on August 14, 1945, after President Harry S. Truman authorized the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was very controversial. We didn't necessarily know how this technology was going to work. And once they were dropped, thousands died instantly. As you can see in that picture in the bottom right, that everything was just completely incinerated. And then thousands died afterward from radiation poisoning. So the justification for this at the time, and even many today, say that if the war would just still go on, there's no reason to think that thousands still wouldn't have died if the battle had gone on in the Pacific between Japan and the Allied forces. World War II was finally over. Casualties estimated about 60 million civilians and military combatants. Okay, so the war is over. How do things unfold? Well, to summarize it, we have an area of Soviet influence to the east, and then the area of Western influence to the western part of Europe, as we can see in this map here. And this sets the stage for the next global conflict that will engulf the next few decades, which is the Cold War. And we'll discuss that a little bit later in the course. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the screencast. Again, if you have any questions, please ask me in class or through the class website through Edmodo. And I'll see you next time.